What was agreed upon long ago. Chapter 1, Section 1. They had once agreed not to speak again. Not in writing, not aloud, but with the shared accuracy of people who understand what silence can preserve. Years had honored that agreement. Now, seated across from her, he understood that restraint, too, has an expiration. She arrived early. That surprised him, though it shouldn't have. She had always respected rooms before she occupied them. When he entered the cafe, she looked up at once, as if she had been listening for his steps rather than the door. "Daniel," she said. "Margaret." They did not stand. They did not reach. The exchange was careful, almost ceremonial, like colleagues acknowledging one another after a long sabbatical. He noticed the way she placed her hands around the cup, not for warmth, but to give them purpose. "I wasn't sure you'd come," she said. He nodded. "Neither was I." That was true, though incomplete. He had been sure he would not come until the moment certainty failed him. He took the chair opposite her and felt, absurdly, that he had already said too much. The cafe was quiet in the particular way academic places become after noon. A few laptops, a few books open to pages no one was actively reading. The windows looked out on the edge of campus, where the trees had begun to thin themselves for autumn. "You look well," she said. "So do you." They let the politeness rest there. Neither of them corrected it. "I won't stay long," she said. "I know you don't like surprises." He smiled, briefly. "I've grown tolerant of them." She studied him, the way she used to when deciding whether a thought was finished. He had once loved that look. He loved it now, which felt like a failure of discipline. "I'm retiring," she said. The word landed without ceremony. He waited for something else to follow, an explanation, an apology, a reason for telling him. None came. "That was fast," he said. She shrugged. "Everything is fast once you stop pretending it isn't." He thought of his own office, the books he had already begun to give away under the pretense of generosity. He thought of the syllabus he revised each year without believing it would be the last. "Congratulations," he said. She smiled, but it did not reach far. "You always did know when to say the correct thing. And you always knew when not to." "That hasn't changed," she said. A silence opened between them. Not an absence, but a presence. It reminded him of standing at the edge of water, aware that stepping forward would erase the distinction between intention and consequence. "I didn't come to reminisce," she said, though nothing in her tone suggested she had come for anything else. "Then why did you come?" She looked past him, toward the window. "Because I wanted to hear your voice before I lost the right to ask for it." He felt the words register physically, a tightening beneath the ribs. "You never lost that right." "That's generous," she said. "And inaccurate." He considered correcting her, then decided not to. Some inaccuracies are stabilizing. "How long are you in town?" he asked. 2 days. "And after that?" "After that, I will be someone who used to live here." He nodded. The distinction mattered. He had stayed. She had learned how to leave. "You could have written," he said. "I did," she replied. "I deleted it." That sounded like her. Margaret believed in drafts that never asked to be forgiven. A server approached. Daniel ordered coffee he did not want. Margaret declined anything more. When they were alone again, the table felt suddenly small. "Do you remember," she asked, "the last thing you said to me?" He did. He had rehearsed forgetting it. "Yes." She waited. "You said," he continued, "that love does not excuse confusion." "And you disagreed," she said. "I did. And now?" He looked at her. Truly looked. The lines at her mouth were new. The steadiness was not. "Now I think confusion is the cost of paying attention." She smiled then, fully. It startled him how much he had missed that. The smile faded, but the warmth remained. "That's almost an apology," she said. "Don't be optimistic." "I'm not," she replied. "I'm careful." He believed her. She had always mistaken care for safety, and he had never corrected her. There was something he wanted to ask. Something he had wanted to ask for years, in moments that felt safe because they were hypothetical. Now that the moment was real, the question felt irresponsible. "Say it," she said quietly. He looked up. "What?" "You've always had that pause. Right before you choose." He hesitated. "Then, did you come because you're leaving, or because I stayed?" She did not answer immediately. When she did, her voice was level. "I came because I didn't want the last version of us to be theoretical." The words sat between them, precise and devastating. Daniel felt the careful architecture of his life shift, not collapse, not yet, but adjust in ways he could not fully trace. Outside, the bell struck the hour. He did not know which one. He knew only that time, which had been so patient for so long, had begun to lean in their direction, and neither of them moved to stop it. Chapter 1, Section 2. They sat with the weight of what had just been said. Not silence exactly, more like a holding pattern, as if the air itself were deciding what it would allow next. Daniel took a slow breath. He did not trust himself to speak without choosing carelessly. Margaret broke first. "I should go," she said, though she made no move to stand. He nodded. Of course. Neither of them reached for their coats. "You know," she continued, "I thought seeing you would make things smaller. Contained. Like returning a book I'd kept too long. And does it?" She smiled faintly. "No. It makes me want to reread." That was dangerous. He felt it immediately, the way one recognizes a thought that will not leave once entertained. "We were good at rereading," he said. "We were good at stopping just before the ending," she replied. Daniel glanced toward the window again. Students crossed the quad in loose clusters, unburdened by whatever histories they would one day inherit. He felt suddenly older than he had that morning. "Margaret," he said, carefully, "we agreed." "I know," she interrupted. Not sharply, gently, but with authority. "I haven't forgotten." "Then why push it?" She looked at him steadily. "I'm not pushing. I'm acknowledging." He waited. She folded her hands, then unfolded them again. "You stayed here because you believed stability was a form of virtue. I left because I believed movement was a form of honesty. Neither of us was wrong." "That's generous," he said. "It's accurate," she replied. "But accuracy doesn't prevent residue." He felt that land. He had built an entire life around residue, around what remains after one chooses correctly. "I didn't come to ask you for anything," she said. "I came to see if the person I remember still exists." "And?" he asked. She studied him again, and this time he did not resist it. "Yes," she said, "but quieter." He smiled, though it was not entirely comfortable. "That's what happens when you survive your arguments." "I'm not sure I did," she said. That surprised him. Margaret had always been the one who emerged intact. "What do you mean?" She hesitated. It was a small pause, but he knew it well. It was the pause she took before deciding whether vulnerability was worth the cost. "I spent years teaching people how to think clearly," she said. "I never taught myself how to want clearly." He leaned back slightly, giving her space. "Wanting was never your problem." "No," she agreed. "Admitting was." The server returned with his coffee. Daniel wrapped his hands around the cup, more for grounding than warmth. The bitterness steadied him. "Do you remember," Margaret asked, "the conference in Seattle?" He did. He remembered the rain, the narrow streets, the hotel bar where they had pretended not to look for each other. "Yes. That was the moment," she said. He did not ask which moment. He knew. "I stood in my room that night," she continued, "and told myself that restraint was a form of intelligence. That if I left the next morning without knocking on your door, I would be choosing the higher ground." "And you were," he said. She met his eyes. "But I've learned something since then. Sometimes the higher ground is just fear with a view." Daniel felt his breath catch, just slightly. He had said something similar once, in a lecture on moral philosophy, without knowing where the thought had come from. He wondered now if it had been hers all along. "You didn't seem afraid," he said. "That's because I was practiced," she replied. "Fear becomes elegant when you repeat it often enough." He took a sip of coffee. It had gone cold. "What about you?" she asked. "Did you ever regret staying?" The question was direct, not accusatory. That made it worse. "I built something," he said. "A marriage that functioned. A career that mattered. A life that made sense. And sometimes," he continued, "I wonder if sense was the wrong metric." She nodded slowly. "Sense is persuasive, but not faithful," he said. She smiled again, and this time it carried something like relief. "I'm glad you didn't become someone who avoids questions," she said. "I'm glad you didn't become someone who asks them lightly." They sat with that mutual recognition. It felt like an exchange of credentials neither had known they were still carrying. Margaret glanced at her watch, then ignored it. "I have a reading tonight," she said. "My farewell performance, apparently." "Of course you do," Daniel said. "You always preferred closure with an audience." She laughed softly. It was the first time she had laughed that afternoon, and it shifted the room. "You should come," she said. He looked up sharply. "I don't think that's wise." "I didn't say it was," she replied. "I said you should." He considered it. The reading would be public, harmless on the surface. A room full of colleagues, Polite applause, familiar questions. Safety disguised as ritual. Would that violate our agreement? He asked. She thought for a moment. No, but it would acknowledge that the agreement has context. That's a dangerous distinction. She tilted her head. So is pretending context doesn't exist. He exhaled slowly. What would you read? She smiled. Something about unfinished conversations. Of course. When is it? He asked. 7. He glanced at his watch. It was just past 4. I'll think about it, he said. That's all I'm asking, she replied. She stood then, finally. He stood as well, the movement slightly out of sync, as if they were still adjusting to sharing space. Daniel, she said, as she put on her coat. Yes. I didn't come here to disrupt your life. I know. I came because it's already been disrupted, she said quietly. Just not by me. He watched her carefully. You don't know that. She smiled, gently this time. I know you. She hesitated, then stepped closer. Not close enough to touch. Close enough to remember how easily they could have. I'll see you tonight, she said, not as a certainty, but not as a question either. She turned and walked toward the door. He watched her leave, noticing absurd details. The way she adjusted the strap of her bag, the brief pause before she pushed the door open, as if she were giving the room one last chance to stop her. When she was gone, the cafe felt suddenly too large. Daniel sat back down, though there was nothing left to sit for. He stared at the empty chair across from him, aware that something had been reintroduced into his life that would not be managed quietly. Outside, the light had shifted. The afternoon had begun its slow surrender to evening. Daniel knew then that he would attend the reading, not because it was harmless, but because avoidance, at this stage of life, felt more reckless than attention. He finished his coffee, stood, and reached for his coat. The agreement they had once honored had not been broken, but it had been reinterpreted. An interpretation, he knew, was where consequences began. Chapter 1, Section 3. Daniel did not go home. If he had, the evening might have settled into its usual sequence. News murmuring from the other room, a meal prepared without thought, the quiet choreography of a marriage long practiced. Instead, he walked the perimeter of campus, letting habit carry him where intention hesitated. The air had cooled. Leaves scraped lightly along the paths, restless, undecided. He passed buildings he had entered for decades, their familiarity now oddly impersonal, as if they belonged to someone else's routine. At 7 minutes past 6, he checked his watch and stopped doing so only when he noticed the repetition. He tried to recall the last time he had attended one of Margaret's readings. It must have been years before she left. She had read with restraint then, too. Never dramatic, never indulgent. She trusted silence. She trusted the audience to meet her halfway. That trust had always unsettled him. The lecture hall was already half full when he arrived. He chose a seat near the back, instinctively. Distance felt like a kind of ethics. From there, he could observe without being observed, or so he told himself. Margaret stood at the podium, speaking with the event coordinator. She wore a dark jacket, simple, severe in the way that had always suited her. Her hair was pulled back. No unnecessary softness. She had not seen him yet. The room filled quickly. Colleagues, former students, a few administrators who believed attendance was a form of loyalty. Polite conversations threaded the air. Daniel listened without hearing. When Margaret stepped fully into view, the room quieted. Not abruptly, but with recognition. She waited until it did. "Thank you for coming," she said. Her voice carried easily, unforced. "I promise not to keep you longer than necessary." A soft laugh moved through the room. Daniel felt something tighten at the sound. He had forgotten how carefully she placed humor, never as defense, always as invitation. She spoke briefly about leaving, about the institution, about gratitude that was sincere without being sentimental. Then she opened her book. "This is an excerpt from a piece I've been working on," she said. "It's unfinished." "That seems appropriate." Daniel straightened, just slightly. She began to read. The passage was spare. Two people meeting late in life. A history only partially disclosed. A conversation interrupted by years rather than minutes. Daniel felt the disquieting sensation of being both audience and subject. He told himself that resemblance was inevitable. Writers, after all, borrowed from everywhere. Still, when she read the line, "They mistook restraint for resolution," he felt it like a private accusation. Her voice did not waver. She read with the same precision she always had, each sentence measured, each pause intentional. The room leaned in, attentive, unaware of the quieter exchange taking place in the back row. Then she looked up, not broadly, not theatrically, but directly, unmistakably. Their eyes met. It was brief, no more than a second, but it carried recognition, acknowledgement, and something else Daniel could not immediately name. Not invitation, not warning, permission. He looked away first. The act felt both cowardly and necessary. When the reading ended, the applause was sustained. Margaret accepted it with a nod, a hand raised briefly in thanks. She closed the book and stepped back, allowing the moderator to return. There were questions, thoughtful ones, predictable ones. Margaret answered with patience, occasionally deflecting, occasionally offering more than was strictly required. Daniel listened, but his attention drifted. He was aware of the way time compressed around her presence, of how easily he could imagine standing beside her, discussing a phrase, a choice, an argument that had never quite resolved. When the event ended, people clustered at the front. Gratitude, congratulations, nostalgia. Daniel remained seated, watching the shape of the crowd change around her. She spoke to everyone, but she did not look for him. That, too, felt intentional. He waited until the room thinned, until the lights brightened slightly, signaling closure. Then he stood. Margaret was gathering her papers when she finally turned and saw him. Her expression did not change, but her shoulders lowered, just a fraction. "You came," she said when he reached her. "I said I'd think about it." "And you did," she replied. They stood there, the space between them newly charged. Around them, the last of the attendees drifted out, voices receding. "Was the piece finished?" he asked. She shook her head. "No." "Will it be?" She considered the question. "That depends." "On what?" "On whether unfinished things are allowed to remain articulate." He smiled. "You always did enjoy a conditional clause. And you always pretended not to," she said. They moved toward the exit together, unhurried. Outside, the evening had fully arrived. The campus lights cast long shadows across the quad. "Walk with me," she said. It was not a request. They walked in silence at first. Daniel felt the pull of familiarity reassert itself, dangerous and comforting. He wondered how many steps it would take before conversation became inevitability rather than choice. "You quoted yourself tonight," he said, eventually. She glanced at him. "Did I?" "You said that restraint can masquerade as virtue." She smiled faintly. "Then I stand by it." They reached the edge of campus, where the street began and the university's authority softened. Margaret stopped. "This is where I turn," she said. He knew that, too. He had always known where she turned. "For what it's worth," he said, "the reading mattered." "So did your being there," she replied. She hesitated. "Then, tomorrow." It was not a question. "What about tomorrow?" he asked. "Tomorrow," she said again, "is still undecided." She stepped back, giving him space to respond, to refuse, to preserve the careful balance he had built. Daniel looked at her, standing there under the streetlight, familiar and newly dangerous all at once. "Yes," he said. The word surprised him with its ease. Margaret nodded once. Then she turned and walked away, her steps steady, unhesitant. Daniel stood alone for a moment longer than necessary. He understood now that the agreement they had once made was no longer the governing document. Something else had begun to draft itself, and it would not be satisfied with footnotes. Chapter 1, Section 4. Daniel slept poorly, not from restlessness exactly, but from a heightened attentiveness that refused to dim. Each time he surfaced from sleep, his mind resumed where it had left off, as if the night were merely an interruption rather than a reprieve. Margaret appeared in fragments, her voice without context, the pause before a sentence, the way she had said tomorrow as if time were something pliable, still willing to negotiate. He rose before dawn and moved quietly through the house. The kitchen light felt intrusive. He did not turn it on. He knew the layout well enough to avoid collision. He made coffee, drank it standing. The day assembled itself around him with practiced neutrality. His wife slept upstairs. Their life together was intact, orderly, kind. He thought of that kindness now and felt its weight more acutely than its comfort. At 9, an email arrived. "If you're still willing," Margaret wrote. Noon. The Arboretum. Nothing else. He stared at the screen longer than necessary. There was no ambiguity to hide inside. Willingness was the only credential required. He did not reply immediately. Instead, he showered, dressed, performed the gestures of a morning that might have belonged to any other Tuesday. Only when the clock read 10:30 did he write back, "I'll be there." The Arboretum sat just beyond the southern edge of campus, neglected by students, favored by retirees, and people who preferred thinking to spectacle. Daniel arrived early and chose a bench near the far path, where the trees grew closer together and conversation felt naturally hushed. He had brought nothing with him. No book, no phone. He wanted no distraction, no excuse to look away. Margaret arrived precisely at noon. She wore a light coat, though the day was warm. When she saw him, she did not wave. She approached directly, as if any display would cheapen the moment. "Thank you," she said, sitting beside him. "For what?" "For not pretending this is accidental." He nodded. "I've never been good at that." They sat quietly for a moment, watching the slow choreography of leaves shifting overhead. Somewhere nearby, water moved. "I leave tomorrow afternoon," she said. "That's soon." "Yes." "And after that?" She looked straight ahead. "After that, I begin being elsewhere." He smiled slightly. "You always had a gift for understatement." She returned the smile, then let it fade. "I won't see you again after today." The sentence was calm, declarative. It did not invite debate. Daniel felt it settle. "Is that a decision," he asked, "or a boundary?" "It's mercy," she said. "For both of us." He did not argue. He suspected that argument would be a form of bargaining, and neither of them had come for that. "What did you want to talk about?" he asked. She took a breath. Let it out slowly. "I wanted to ask you something, and I wanted to hear your answer without time to revise it." "That seems unfair." She glanced at him. "That's how truth usually feels." He considered that, then nodded. "Do you believe," she asked, "that we did the right thing?" The question was not new, but the context was. There were no hypotheticals left to protect it. "Yes," he said after a moment. "At the time. And now." He looked at her. Really looked. The composure, the clarity, the unresolved gravity that had always drawn him. "Now," he said, "I believe we did the necessary thing." She absorbed that. Necessary is a colder word. "It is," he agreed. "But it's also more honest." She nodded slowly. "I needed to know whether you'd recast it as cowardice." "No," he said. "I wouldn't insult us that way." Her shoulders eased, just slightly. "Good," she said. "Because I can live with necessity. I couldn't live with regret masquerading as virtue." They walked then, following the path as it curved deeper into the trees. Their steps fell into an easy rhythm, familiar without being intimate. "Do you ever wonder," she asked, "what would have happened if we hadn't stopped?" "Yes," he said, "but not in the way people expect." She waited. "I don't imagine a life together," he continued. "I imagine a moment extended, and I don't trust moments to scale." She smiled at that. "You always did distrust momentum." "I distrust permanence," he corrected. "It demands certainty I've never had." They reached a clearing. Sunlight filtered down in broken patterns. Margaret stopped walking. "This is where I turn," she said again, echoing the night before. He understood that this time it meant something else. "Say it," she said. "What?" "The thing you've been editing since Seattle." He hesitated. The words felt exposed without revision, but that was the point. "I loved you," he said, in a way that required restraint to survive. She closed her eyes briefly. When she opened them, they were steady. "I loved you," she said, in a way that mistook survival for resolution. They stood there, the truth between them complete now, unadorned. "I'm glad we spoke," she said. "So am I." She stepped closer, just once, just enough that he could feel the warmth of her presence. She did not touch him. "This," she said, gesturing faintly between them, "is where it ends." He nodded. "I know." She smiled then. Not sadly, not bravely. Simply, "Take care, Daniel." "You too, Margaret." She turned and walked away along the path, her figure gradually absorbed by the trees. Daniel watched until she was no longer visible. He did not follow. He sat on the bench and let the day continue without him for a while. When he finally stood, he felt altered, not broken, not undone, but reoriented, as if something essential had been returned to its proper place. He knew this would not be the last time he thought of her, but it would be the last time they spoke. And that knowledge, surprisingly, did not feel like loss. It felt like completion. Chapter 2, Section 1. Daniel returned home earlier than expected. The house registered his presence the way it always had, without surprise, without inquiry. He placed his keys in the bowl by the door and stood for a moment longer than necessary, listening to the quiet confirm itself. His wife, Ellen, was in the study upstairs. He could hear the faint sound of pages turning, the familiar rhythm of someone reading not to escape, but to remain oriented. That steadiness had once been a relief. Now it felt like a question he had delayed answering. He went upstairs and paused at the doorway. "Back already?" she asked, without looking up. "Yes." She marked her page and glanced at him. Her gaze was direct, practiced, kind. Years of shared life had given it that quality, attention without scrutiny. "How was your afternoon?" she asked. "It was clarifying," he said. She smiled faintly. "That sounds like something you'd say when you don't want to explain." He returned the smile. "I suppose it is." She closed the book. "Dinner's in an hour. I thought we might eat outside if the weather holds." "That sounds good." She nodded, accepting the answer as complete. Ellen had always understood when to stop asking. It was one of the many reasons their marriage worked. Daniel went to their bedroom and sat on the edge of the bed. He removed his shoes, lined them carefully by the door. The gestures were familiar, almost ceremonial. He wondered how many of his days had been composed of such small, precise acts of maintenance. He thought of Margaret walking away along the arboretum path. Not dramatically, not once turning back. The memory did not ache. That unsettled him more than pain would have. At dinner, Ellen spoke about a former student who had written to thank her for a recommendation letter written nearly 2 decades earlier. Daniel listened, attentive, engaged. He asked the right questions. He laughed in the appropriate places. "You're quiet tonight," she said eventually. "Am I?" "Yes," she replied, but not withdrawn. He considered that distinction. "I'm thinking about how much of our lives is decided by what we agree not to disturb." She tilted her head slightly. "That sounds like a lecture." "It's more of a confession." She studied him for a moment, then nodded. "Well, try not to disturb the basil. It's finally recovering." Later, as they cleared the table together, their hands brushed briefly. The contact was unremarkable, familiar, real. He felt gratitude, sharp and grounding. That night, sleep came more easily than he expected. When it did, it was dreamless. The following morning, Daniel went to campus early. His office still smelled faintly of old paper and lemon polish. He set his bag down and stood by the window, watching the courtyard fill. He opened his email and deleted 3 messages without reading them. Then he paused. There was one from Margaret, time-stamped the previous evening. He did not open it immediately. Instead, he sat at his desk and straightened a stack of papers he had not touched in months. Notes for a seminar he would not teach again. Marginalia written by a younger version of himself, more certain of where arguments would lead. Finally, he opened the message. "Daniel, I didn't want to leave without saying this in writing, even if it remains unread for a while. Yesterday mattered to me more than I expected. Not because it changed anything, but because it didn't need to. Take that as closure, not invitation. M." He read it twice, then a third time, slowly. He did not reply. He archived the message, not deleting it, not flagging it, placing it somewhere it could exist without demanding attention. At 10, a knock sounded on his door. "Come in," he said. It was Thomas Reed, a junior colleague he had mentored for years. Bright, earnest, still convinced that clarity was achievable if one just worked hard enough. "Do you have a minute?" Thomas asked. "For you?" "Always." Thomas sat, then hesitated. "I was offered a position at Stanford." Daniel smiled. "Congratulations." "I haven't accepted yet." "Of course you haven't." Thomas exhaled. "I don't know if leaving is the right thing." Daniel leaned back. He felt the symmetry immediately, almost smiled at it. "Why are you asking me?" he said. "Because you stayed," Thomas replied. "Everyone says that was the right choice." Daniel considered the young man carefully. "Staying isn't a virtue," he said finally. "It's a strategy. Sometimes it's the correct one. And sometimes," Thomas asked, "and sometimes it's just the one you can justify longest." Thomas nodded slowly, absorbing that. "So what would you do?" Daniel paused. He thought of the arboretum, of restraint, of agreements honored until they weren't. "I would ask myself," he said, "whether the life I'm protecting is still responsive." Thomas frowned slightly. "Responsive to what?" "To attention," Daniel said. "To curiosity. To the person you're becoming." Thomas sat with that, then stood. Thank you. After he left, Daniel remained seated, the office unusually still. He realized then that the chapter he had closed with Margaret had not ended the story. It had changed its voice. And that voice, quieter now, was asking something he could no longer pretend not to hear. He turned back to his desk, opened a blank document, and began to write. Not an article, not a lecture, but something without a clear destination. Outside, the courtyard filled with motion. Inside, Daniel allowed himself, for the first time in years, to begin without knowing where he would stop. Chapter 2, Section 2. Daniel wrote for 40 minutes before realizing he had not checked the time. The discovery felt like a small breach in habit, almost indulgent. He did not stop. He kept going until the sentences began to resist him, until the page asked for attention rather than momentum. What he was writing did not resemble scholarship. There were no citations, no arguments announced in advance. The language moved cautiously, feeling its way forward, as if uncertain it would be permitted to exist. He stopped only when a knock sounded again. This time it was Ellen. "I thought I heard you in," she said, stepping into the office. "You left your lunch." He smiled. "I'm experimenting with neglect." She raised an eyebrow. "Dangerous at our age." She set the container on his desk and glanced at the screen. He did not move to hide it. The document title read simply, "Notes." "Are those for the new seminar?" she asked. "No," he said. "I don't think so." She nodded, unbothered. "Well, eat something." After she left, Daniel closed the document without saving. The act felt neither evasive nor decisive, just provisional. He ate slowly, aware of the quiet satisfaction of being cared for. It was a different register of intimacy than the one he had just survived. Less urgent, more durable. In the afternoon, he met with a graduate student struggling with a dissertation chapter that had lost its center. Daniel listened, asked questions, circled the real problem gently. "You're writing around the thing that scares you," he said finally. The student blinked. "Isn't that what people do?" "Until they decide not to," Daniel replied. Walking back to his office, he recognized the echo. Advice, he knew, was often autobiography disguised as generosity. At 4, his phone buzzed. A text from an unfamiliar number. "Safe travels," it read. "And thank you for not correcting me when I needed to believe it was finished." He did not reply. Instead, he placed the phone face down on the desk and opened the document again. This time, he saved it. That evening, Daniel and Ellen walked the neighborhood after dinner. The air was warm, the lights softening the edges of things. They spoke about nothing of consequence. The neighbor's new dog, the state of the sidewalk, a lecture Ellen was revising. "You've been lighter," she said, as they turned the corner. "Lighter how?" "Present," she replied. "Not distracted." "That's new." He considered that. "Maybe I'm just paying attention." She smiled. "That's usually the difference." They reached their house and paused at the door, reluctant to end the walk. Daniel felt an unexpected surge of tenderness, sharp enough to feel earned. Later, in bed, Ellen read while he stared at the ceiling. "Are you all right?" she asked. "Yes," he said. Then, after a moment, "I think I am." She reached for his hand, squeezed it once, and returned to her book. The gesture was small, complete. Daniel slept. The next weeks unfolded without drama. Margaret left town. Campus resumed its predictable rhythms. Leaves fell, were swept, fell again. Daniel continued to write. Not daily, not on a schedule, but often enough that the pages began to accumulate. The work resisted classification. Memoir felt too exposed. Fiction too evasive. He let it remain unnamed. Occasionally, a sentence surprised him with its accuracy. More often, he deleted entire paragraphs without regret. The process felt honest in a way productivity never had. One afternoon, Thomas stopped by again. "I accepted the offer," he said, breathless. "Stanford." Daniel smiled. "Good. I was afraid you'd say that." "Why?" "Because then it would feel real." Daniel nodded. "It is." After Thomas left, Daniel returned to his writing. He found himself composing a scene about two people who chose restraint not because they lacked courage, but because they understood the costs of courage too well. He paused, reread it, then closed the document. Some things, he understood now, did not need to be resolved to be true. On a Saturday morning in early October, a letter arrived. Not an email, a letter. Margaret's handwriting was unmistakable, precise, unhurried. He did not open it immediately. He carried it to the study, and placed it on the desk beside his notebook. He sat for a long time, hands folded, aware of the care the act required. Finally, he opened it. Daniel, I promised myself I wouldn't write again. Consider this a failure of restraint, not intention. I'm settled. The days are quieter here. I teach less. I walk more. I've stopped mistaking motion for progress. I reread what I've written. I can see now where I was evasive, where I was brave, where I was neither. I don't miss you in the way people expect. I miss the conversation that required my full attention. That may be the truest form of intimacy I know. Take care of it, wherever you find it. M. Daniel folded the letter carefully and placed it back in the envelope. He did not feel compelled to respond. Not because there was nothing to say, but because the exchange felt complete. He returned to his desk and opened his notebook. This time, he wrote without hesitation. Outside, the light shifted again, as it always did. And Daniel, no longer afraid of that movement, allowed himself to follow it, sentence by sentence, without agreement, without certainty, but with care. Chapter 2, Section 3. By November, the writing had acquired a rhythm Daniel trusted. Not speed, not consistency, rhythm. The sense that the work would wait for him without resentment and meet him where he was rather than where he wished to be. He wrote in the early mornings now, before the campus filled, before the day asserted its claims. The house remained quiet at that hour. Ellen slept. The light was pale and provisional. He did not reread what he wrote the night before. He had learned that revision too early became negotiation, and negotiation was how clarity diluted itself. One morning, midway through a paragraph, he stopped. The sentence had surprised him with its directness. It was not elegant. It was not clever. It was simply accurate. He sat back and let that be enough. At breakfast, Ellen poured coffee and watched him over the rim of her mug. "You look pleased," she said. "I am," he replied. "With what?" "With not knowing yet." She smiled. "That's new." "No," he said. "It's just finally honest." They ate quietly. Outside, the first frost had thinned the lawn into a map of pale edges and darker centers. Daniel felt, for the first time in years, that the season matched him. The department meeting that afternoon was long and procedural. Retirement timelines, budget adjustments, the careful language institutions use to reassure themselves that continuity is not accidental. Daniel listened more than he spoke. When his turn came, the chair cleared his throat. "Daniel, you'll be stepping down at the end of the academic year," she said. "We'd like to mark the occasion." He nodded. "I appreciate that. There's talk of a symposium," she continued. "Former students. Colleagues." "That won't be necessary," he said gently. A pause followed. Mild surprise. "It's customary," the chair said. "So is revision," Daniel replied. And yet, a few smiles moved around the table. The matter was not pressed. Later, walking back to his office, he felt an unexpected lightness. Declining the symposium was not an act of withdrawal. It was a correction. He did not want his career summarized. He wanted it absorbed. That evening, a package arrived. Inside was a slim book, Margaret's latest. The dedication page was blank. He ran his finger along the spine, then placed it on the shelf with the others. He would read it later. Not now. He did not want her voice in his head while his own was still forming. Instead, he returned to his desk and opened the document. This time, he titled it, "On Attention." The title felt provisional, but permitted. He wrote until his hand cramped, until thought lagged behind sensation. When he stopped, the page count startled him. Not because of its length, but because he had not been counting. Weeks passed. Winter arrived without ceremony. Daniel and Ellen hosted a small gathering before the holidays. Colleagues, neighbors, familiar laughter arranged into predictable patterns. Daniel moved through the room easily, attentive, unburdened. At one point, Ellen joined him near the window. "You seem settled," she said. "I am," he replied. She considered him for a moment. "That's not the same as satisfied." "No," he agreed. "But it's closer to peace." She nodded, accepting the distinction. Later that night, as they cleaned up together, she said, "You've been writing more." "Yes." "Is it for publication?" "I don't know." She smiled. "That's the best answer you've given all week." In January, Daniel received an invitation to give a final lecture, one of his choosing. A capstone, the chair called it. He declined at first, then reconsidered. "Not a lecture," he replied. "A conversation." The chair hesitated, then agreed. Daniel spent weeks preparing. not notes. Questions. On the day of the event, the room was full. Students, faculty, a few people who had heard, dimly, that something might happen. Daniel stood at the front and waited until the room quieted. I won't be teaching you anything today, he began. I'm going to ask you to notice what you avoid. A murmur moved through the room. Interest, unease. For years, he continued, I believed that clarity was the highest intellectual virtue. I no longer do. He spoke slowly, carefully, not as authority, but as witness. About restraint, about attention, about the difference between endings and completions. He did not mention Margaret. He did not need to. When he finished, there was silence. Then applause, measured, sincere. Afterward, a student approached him. That wasn't what I expected, she said. It rarely is, he replied. That night, Daniel dreamed of walking through the arboretum again. The paths were familiar, but the trees had changed. When he reached the clearing, no one was there. He did not feel loss. He felt space. He woke before dawn and went to his desk. This time, he reread what he had written. He made small changes. Removed a sentence that tried too hard. Let another remain, imperfect but true. Outside, the first light appeared, thin and determined. Daniel wrote until the day found him. And when it did, he did not close the document. He let it stay open.